Good afternoon. This is which I didn't let Denise. I think Denise was waiting for me in the last session to announce the session, and I didn't. And so I left it to her, and I think she was expecting me to. So sorry, Denise, if you're watching this, but this is the 3 p.m. short story and poetry and short stories, because they're all in alphabetical order, poetry and short stories. So we have Lee here, who does both. We have Alan. I don't know whether you've written it. We'll come. I'll ask you. And Esther. Um, so, Lee, would you like to tell us a bit about you and your poetry in the main? Because this is the poetry and short stories, but what else
Yeah.
do you do?
Well, poetry, I mean, short stories and poetry are sort of interlinked, really, because poetry can actually be a whole short story just presented in a slightly different way. A wonderful argument we've always had with David Wake, who thinks poetry is rubbish. And I said, poetry is an incomplete story using less words, and you have to use your imagination. But I write children's books, I write adult humorous stories, and from one of the other discussions we had, I actually have got a pen name Lee Hemingway because I've written an alien crime story, which is much raunchier than all my other stuff. And I didn't really want that to be related to all my children's books, which I've been doing since 2020. It is proven to be difficult to be Lee Hemingway and Lee Benson. But then the new book I'm working on, Lee Benson, which is the fourth story of my art trilogy, is also slightly raunchier than all the other ones put together. So I'm going,
What do you do?
maybe I'll just change my Lee Benson children's author name and become somebody else different there.
Yeah.
But short stories I like because I tend to not be able to write huge novels. And so my stories tend to be and qualify as novellas. Well, there's nothing wrong with that because Ernest Hemingway, most of his was novellas.
That was my
And
question. The next question, why you picked Hemet, whether it was in
it
homage.
wasn't me. I wanted to be cool because my name's Lee Benson and I hated it for years. And
Oh.
I thought my other name would be Gene Hedges. Lee is in Gene, Benson is in Hedges.
Ah,
And my American friend said, rubbish, nobody's going to know who that is.
no.
So you're going
And
to be called Lee Hemingway. And I went, oh, okay.
how do you
Simple as that.
spell? Because there are
Simple as that.
so many ways of spelling Jean as well.
Well, yeah. So yeah, but it would be. I thought it was really cool. He said no one's going to know that, so
Oh.
I had to become Lee Hemingway, which means a different Lee Hemingway Instagram and all that stuff. And I cross-pollinate them all. So why shouldn't Lee Benson sponsor Lee Hemingway? And why shouldn't Lee Hemingway say, "Go buy those children's books; they're great"? So that's the problem.
That's very true. That's very true. Yes,
Yeah.
publicize each other's books.
Well, I've always
Um,
enjoyed poetry from when I was young. Spike Milligan was my hero.
oh,
And I started to my original poetry was songs because I was in a band in the 80s, and that was the first time I'd released private poetry out into the public, and it's very different when you let it go. And then
mhm.
I started to put books together, poetry books collections, and over the last year or two, I've completely rewritten 10 books of poetry and put them out as two complete new volumes. Most have been totally edited and represented. It took quite a while to do.
Mm,
So my myriad of poetic oddities are
right,
both poetry and extended short stories or shorter stories
yeah.
in
See,
both books.
short stories are my first love. If I could make, I don't make money out of my novels, to be fair, but if I could make a living out of just writing short stories, I'd be
And
happy.
how short is a short story? What do you define as short
Well,
story? For how many
my
words?
longest, you can't really see them because the light's on them. I have a collection up there called Flashes, and then one further down, I always go the wrong way, called Shorts. So there, the Flashes starts at about 25 words, and then
Sure.
goes up to the Flashes go up to 500 words. And then, I mean, we're a bit more liberal in this country than America because America is quite definitive up to microfiction up to 150, and then 150 to 500 is a
Hmm.
flash fiction. But over here, flash fiction we tend to allow up to 1,000 words, and then it
Okay.
becomes short story territory. Um, but yeah, anything up to I tend to write short. I have a 50-word short story competition, microfiction competition on my blog, which has to be 50 words exactly. But there's Ernest Hemingway's six-word stories, For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn, which is attributed. The six-word stories are attributed to him, but I think they've been going a long time before he was the most famous one. But one of my questions actually was going to be, we'll come on to Alan in a second, was going to be the overlap between poetry and short stories. Because the first thing when I went to an evening class, I'd moved up to Northampton, didn't know anybody. So I went to a creative writing evening class run by the fabulous Sally Spencer, who writes crime novels. And I took along a poem, which I'm very fond of. I don't really write poetry, so I'm hoping you will enlighten me today, Lee. Um, and it was all through the eyes of a 6-month-old baby. So his father's just gone in from work, older brothers playing on a PlayStation, his mother's making his goo, and she called it chopped up prose. And I drove home, and I say this in WI talks. I drove home and I went, that was horrible. I never want to go back again in front of all these retired ladies, mostly retired ladies, and it gets a bit of a laugh from them, and the one of the evening in some cases, and so. And I said, but Sally gave me the homework to write a crime story. So I then went back with my crime story, and she still pulled it apart, but there was enough promise in it for me then to, because it could have broken me completely, and that would have been it. I wouldn't have gone back again.
But
Um,
that was somebody's opinion.
it
So,
was, but
you know,
yeah, that was a long time ago, 30 years ago. So I didn't have as broad shoulders,
well,
and I'm a
it's
former student.
why it's why I call my collections poetic oddities, because that allows for then something which is non-poetic but still works within the flow of my somewhat absurd style of thinking, I suppose. So
Yeah.
that therefore I can not just have to separate basic poetry and a short story. Although you have given me an idea that maybe I can split them off into different things, and maybe earn some more money doing short stories. Who
Well,
knows?
they were originally 5 smaller collections that I wrote one a month, and but it was too cost ineffective to ineffective to publish them like that. So then they became two, and the only way I could, because they're so quirky, they just go off in all different directions. There's no way to theme them because publishers like themes in short story collections on the whole.
But don't you
Um,
notice if you've got a short story collection, they're all of a theme and they become very similar with the theme,
yeah,
you sort of lose interest. And so you want to keep motivating, you want to keep enjoying. Oh, that was different, that was
yeah,
different. If everything's the
exactly,
same,
exactly.
it's like, no
Um,
thanks.
yes, so we're going from one extreme to the other here, from comedy to the dark. Alan,
Yeah, I was thinking about this
horror,
actually. There's a lot,
horror stories, yes.
yeah, a lot to think about, even just on the poetry side actually, because I don't do much poetry, but I did do a poem in my first book, Cat in the Moon, which was written when my death of one of our pets. But then I wasn't done then, and then I ended up writing a whole story then around that, and that featured in that, and as Lee said, actually, I'd forgotten I did this ages ago. I used to be friends with someone who was into music and wanted to write music, but wasn't great with lyrics.
Right.
So I remember I wrote a few songs, which were stories, as Lee said. They were self-contained stories. But on their own would have been poetry. But they were stories in themselves. They just had those elements which made them poems. But yeah, mainly on the short story side. Yeah, I write horror ones, and mainly probably because of Sean Campbell, because I like competing in his spooky shorts contest every year. So every year I kind of hopefully sort of manage to write a story
You
and
won,
actually
you won
gone,
a couple of years ago. You won 2024.
yeah, one with a story called Self Defense, which I was very pleased about. It's one of those things I'd say with the horror work, but one thing with short stories, which I think is really cool, especially with the different to a book. I think with a book, I think you need to have at least a main character that people can relate to or like in some way, or
Mm.
feel something towards, and then the plot can take you along. With a short story, you can make the main character someone really horrible, but because you've only got to keep their attention for a short amount of time, it doesn't matter. So that's the thing I like playing with short stories. I think in most of the short stories I've written, especially in self-defense, the main character is horrible, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because you don't have to go on a massive journey with that person. You're only going to see a small snapshot of that person's life.
But how many villains have we loved in novels, even though they're supposed to be the villain?
in my long books, I always do that. So the villains are generally very charming, and they've got a lot of. They're usually very, very funny. So they've got qualities that people will like. But in
Mm.
the short story, sometimes they are just odious. There's no redeeming features at all. Oh,
Mm.
Mm.
Esther, good after, we're still, of course, we're afternoon,
Yeah,
3 o'clock.
afternoon.
Um, do tell us about you and your writing, because you write under two names. This we were talking about pen names earlier on. You kept
Mm.
the Esther, and then you have a different name. You write short stories, non-fiction, and children's
Yes,
stories.
so I'm kept with Esther Chilton for the short stories and then the workbooks because I teach writing as well with the Writers Bureau.
Mm,
And so I wanted to then, when I started writing children's fiction, I wanted to keep, a different, to separate it
mm,
because some of the stories wouldn't be suitable for little ones. So it came about. So I go under the name of Esther Moonstomp for the children's. And that just came about very quickly when I was in hospital once, and there was a lovely nurse, and she just kept giggling and laughing. She said, "Oh, I love the name Esther." And
mm.
she said, "I used to call my daughter Mia, my little Esther Moonstomp." And I
Oh,
thought, oh, what a great name for,
yeah.
a children's author. So that's hence the different name. So I kept the Esther for that.
Did
But
did she know? Does the
no, I
name?
keep. I need to go to. It's not too far away, but I do need to go and take her a copy of the book and show her and thank her.
Oh,
So
It's a
yeah,
great name, though.
isn't
it
it?
is. Yes, yeah, that's what I thought. But everything else is under Chilton, especially because I have students, and I first put together a collection of short stories because my students were asking me, "Where can we read your work?" And so I thought, well, I'll put together stories I've had published or won in competitions, put them together in a collection.
Mm,
And I think it was also nice, like you're saying, they're all different. They haven't got that theme. And I think that's, you don't know what you're going to get because I like to write, some of them are a bit darker, some of them are really sort of poignant. Some are very short, 50 words, others are 5,000 words. So I think it's quite nice to have a mixture, together. So.
It it's called The Storm, isn't it?
I've got
You get
two.
okay.
I've got A Walk in the Woods,
Right.
and The Storm. So two collections I put together. And I do have another one to come out, as well, but it's getting around to doing it with everything else. As
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone knows, it's fitting it in, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Lee writes rhyming poetry,
Not
and
always.
we were this morning we were in with Sumera, who her children's book is rhyming, and I wonder. See, I love the likes of Pam Ayres and Wendy Cope, and they do a lot
Mhm.
of rhyming poetry, which people they think it's easy, and then it's a bit of a cop out because it's seen as a sort of frivolous, not very, not necessarily important or serious, but it's just not as poetic as the more serious forms. I went back into my archives, and because I've written for when I lived in Northampton, we had a local writing group, and I think the first Tuesday of the month was prose. The second was reading group. The third was poetry. And so I went along to the poetry. And one week we had to write a pantoum. Another week we had to write a sestina. Another week we had to write a sonnet. And another one we had to write Fibonacci. And then there were other forms thereafter. So I have in my entire poetry collection one pantoum, one sestina, one sonnet, and one Fibonacci. And I think that was more luck than anything else that they came out fairly fully formed. And then I looked back to see what the rules for the poem and thought, okay, actually I don't need to tweak that very much. So that was more luck than anything else. Um, Esther, do you write any poetry?
I have done in the past. I've actually won a couple of competitions. I don't know how now because it tends to have lapsed a bit, but
Right.
I do sort of enjoy it. And I've got a friend who writes beautiful poetry, and then she'll sort of pluck this form of poetry, and I've no idea what it is. But no, it keeps me on my toes, and it's interesting, fascinating. So.
because it's for me it's a bit like script where I don't know, Alan, if you've ever written a script. I love dialogue. Dialogue is my favorite. If I turn the page and there's a whole load of description, I kind of okay, not supposed. That if I open the next, if turn the page and there's loads of description, I'm kind of savouring it. So script is very useful for dialogue, but the format I felt was very constrictive. You have to say who it's by and who's speaking, and then say what they're doing, and whether you feel that Lee, as the main poet of the group here, whether you find that forms of poetry are constrictive in any way because you have to do it a certain way.
I wrote a sonnet with an extra line in it for purely that reason.
Right, to
It has to be
rebel.
like this, it has to be like that. And no, I've never been like that. And I find the way my poetry works, it's not always funny. Some of it's quite serious, quite sad, quite deep.
Mm,
But I try to find the lighter side of it somewhere along the line, and it turns midway. It almost becomes a dialogue in itself. Some are
mm,
very visual, some are very, well, I won't use the word sarcastic, but they are very commentary from something from walking across the road to suddenly changing my mind, and I will write to the way my mind is thinking.
yeah,
So it's a more unusual style of poetry. In fact, I'd rather create a style than be said, you write haiku, you write this style, you write that.
yeah,
They vary, and they vary because of the way you think, rather than setting out to form an established style.
yeah.
So I don't think I can fit into any of those controlled
And
rules.
presumably prose poetry would be because I was accused of having chopped up prose. There still has to be an element of style to it. So your
Yeah,
alliteration and the word choice, because a lot of novelists they've either tried short stories, and it amazes me as I write both because I do find short stories easier. I like writing novels. I never thought I'd write novels, but NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, where you write a novel in a month, sadly
sure.
isn't with us anymore. Um, but I thought, okay, I'll because I love spending just a day or two on a story and then move on to the next one. And we were saying in the ideas panel earlier on that I have more ideas than I can cope with. So if I could only write novels, I would struggle. I mean, I would and I wouldn't because I'd never stop writing because I have so many ideas. But if I could only use one per novel, I'd struggle. But I wonder whether writing short form prose poetry or short stories are more difficult than writing longer pieces.
David Wake asked me when I wrote my first book, which was So You Want to Own an Art Gallery, and he said, "Oh, it's very anecdotal." I said, "Well, my entire life as a gallery owner was very anecdotal. Every day was different. There was no set 9 to 5, and therefore I wrote it from being a gallery owner, and
Mm,
that's how it was." He went, "Really?" I said, "Very different to your world, David." But and then the second book and the third, it's very much like that. So
right.
anecdotes become short stories, become novels.
Mm.
Simples.
And Alan, you write short stories and novels. Dare I ask you, because this is like saying asking a an author which character is their favourite, either of one book or all the characters they've written. It's like saying which is your favourite child. Although we have three pets, and I could tell you the answer to that one. But do you prefer? This is maybe not an either or. If somebody said you could only write one form for the rest of your life, could you pick one or the other for whether it's for enjoyment or sales?
That's yeah, you give me a really hard question. Maybe easier to ask which of my kids I prefer.
Okay.
Um, um, they're very
Interrupted you.
different, and you could argue as well that shorts. I tell story. I tend to. I'm doing it now. I'm closing my eyes. I tend to write stories like I'm like a voyeur of another world. So I'm looking in, and all I'm doing is chronicling what I see. So for me, the only difference really between a short story and a longer book, and I don't write really, really long books, is just how long the story goes. Some stories are very, very short and clipped, and all of them are insights into the main character's life. It has you start at one point and you end at another point, and a short story is exactly the same. It's just that window is a lot smaller.
Mm.
Um, I mean, there are some differences. I think I just mentioned about, you can. I think with a short story, you can hold a reader's attention with maybe a character that you'd struggle with in a long novel, I think. Um, and I would say the characters in my long novels I'm much more fond of, but you invest more time in them.
Mm.
So if I had to pick, I'd probably, because of that reason, I'd pick the longer, the longer stories and the novels, novellas type thing. Um, but it is a hard one because it is nice to do those short stories because they have a slightly different dynamic. There's a lot of stories I've started where I thought, well, that's going to be a long book, and actually it's ended quite fast. And I go, oh no, it's not. It's a short story. That took me by surprise because I don't necessarily always see the finish point. I'd start something, I've absolutely no idea where it's going to go, so it can finish very abruptly versus obviously a longer novel that finishes a lot further down the road.
Well, I'm sure Estelle, you've heard the phrase something like "however long their legs are," or however long a story's legs
Yeah.
are, whether it's a short story or longer. You've written a book for short story writers, Esther, for those who wish to write short stories. Dare I ask you what your number one tip would be for short story wannabes?
Um, No, I mean, yes, I don't know. There's so many, different things, really. I think, for me, even in a short story, because you've obviously got, a few number of words in comparison to novel to make the reader care for the character. But I think I always try and make readers feel something for the character. So I think it's still, even though you're not going to go into as much depth as you are a novel, it's still you need to get your characters right and the reader feeling something. Otherwise, they're not going to connect. So they still need to do that. So your characters are still very important. Even if a story is plot driven, I think characters are so important. So, spend the time on those.
Absolutely. I think one thing that's come out of today is about characters. Quite often when I'm teaching, I'll say, yes, you've got things like Ian Rankin's Edinburgh, where it has become pretty much a character in its own right. But if you had to choose character, setting, plot, then I would say most people would choose the character, because you could have a very ordinary location, um, but so in a way, yes, it's lovely to have a sense of place. And you've got to have a plot that hangs together.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it sort of falls off, or you've got a saggy middle, or then the reader may not necessarily get to the end. But if
Yeah.
you've got a character that and there are lots of novels where you're not supposed to like the character, but it's written in a way where you want to know what happens
Yes.
at the end, whether they change, or they learn something, or they get their comeuppance, however it is. I think for any kind of story, it's all about the character.
I
Yeah.
think it is. And I think another thing that's important and with short stories is also you need to draw the reader in straight away.
Mm.
I always remember when I was judging for Writers Forum, and it was always when I was taking over that role, the previous judge said, it's basically if you're not hooked within those first few paragraphs, then it's not going to win. And that's absolutely true, because even if the rest of it is brilliant, then because the beginning's not right, then you can't award it a place.
Oh.
So, you do need to hook the reader. It doesn't mean you have to have something, dramatic, but it's just to make the reader curious as well. And or even if you can make them care for the character straight away, within the first few paragraphs, then you've got them there where you
It's the
want them.
selling line, though, isn't it? That's what it applies to everything. It's the selling line. You read the first
Yes.
two sentences, you've got it. If you haven't, you might not read the rest of it.
No, that's it. Yes.
The
I think, I
difference
think the same
between
thing.
Alan and myself, Morgan, is Alan said he sort of voyeuristically looks in over the scenario, and I write from within the book. I can sometimes finish writing a chapter totally, completely, utterly, physically, and emotionally exhausted because I've lived it while trying to write it, which
Mm.
maybe that's a weird way to write, but that's the only way I seem to be able to do it.
Yeah. Well, I the only James Patterson book I don't read a lot because editing's my day job. So it's the last thing I want to do when I've spent all day reading is and pulling apart is to read again. But I love reading short stories. Um, but I can't remember what I was going to say now. It's gone out of my head. I'm going to ask you a question while I'm thinking about that. Alan, you write very dark short stories. Is there anything that's too dark?
That's an interesting one, actually. I mean, self-defense. I remember writing that, and I kind of, yeah, on the character side, just to mention, I kind of play with that a little bit. So I kind of let the reader sometimes imprint their own values on that character, which might not necessarily be true by the end of the short story. So you almost impose some good qualities on that, or something you relate to, which you might find out later isn't. So, but yeah, doing self-defense, I kind of and finished that, and actually it goes to the other point as well of grabbing people straight away. So the beginning of self-defense is basically someone dying, and as soon as they die, they wake up in a courtroom on trial for wasting their life. So they're straight on the dock,
Wow.
Wow.
with no representation, having to defend whether they're going to heaven or hell. Um, but there's some bits in that, and I go, oh, is that too much? Because I kind of read it and went,
Mm,
do you know what? Have I gone a bit far there? Is it too bad? Are people going to read that and go, oh God, I can't read this? But
yeah.
then the people who read it, that was the one that won the award. So the people who read it obviously disagreed with me, but I still read it and I go, "Ooh, that's did I write that?" Because it was a little bit. I don't think you can do it. Depends on the audience. Obviously, you can switch off some audiences, but I've always said I've never wanted to write beige books or
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
So even if people don't like it, people read it at the beginning or read some of it and say this isn't for me. I'd much prefer that to have people on both ends of the spectrum either love it
Yeah.
or no, absolutely not for me, than to have a load of people in the middle go, oh, it's all right. I
Yeah.
don't really want to be in that beige kind of realm, really.
No, exactly. It's like,
So I don't think you can go too far because I think if you
yeah.
do put some people off, it's just not for them.
Yeah. Well, I have a book up there with my women's. I call it my Marmite novel. Is that was my only thing that's been traditionally published, and it was published by a publisher who does crime and women's fiction, but were best known for crime, and so it didn't do as well as we'd hoped. So I got it back, and she's quite. And I'll be mentioning this in the women's at 4 o'clock that she's quite a feisty. She knows what she wants. She's quite a. I think the audience now will probably be more sympathetic with her or glad that she's holding her own. Um, but at the time it went through the NetGalley and all the free reviews and so on. But this was somebody on Amazon, and I don't normally read my reviews, but I was curious, as you do every now and then, go on Amazon, and it was a 1 star review. I may have had lots of 1 star reviews since, I don't know, but it was 1 star review, and she said, I don't normally leave reviews for books, but this one was so bad I felt I had to. And yet the same book in the same year was A bloggers, and how many books do book reviewers, book bloggers read in a year? Their favourite book of the year out of everybody's. So that's my Marmite. You can't please everybody all the time. We have a new background for Lee Benson. Tell us about your ghost novella. We were talking about
Oh,
dark things, and I have remembered what I'd forgotten earlier on.
this is
I've written it down. I'll
this
come
this
back to
is
it.
a this was a true story, and I called it a ghostly novella called "The True Tales of Rotten Towers," about three ghosts in an apartment which I moved into that caused total chaos. And 5 years after I sold the apartment, I thought it was the right time to publish the book.
Right.
And but is it a short story? Is it the ghost novella? It's only 10 chapters,
Mm,
but it was absolutely real, apart from I changed the names of everybody concerned in it, and I had witnesses for the whole thing. And I
mm.
get great pleasure in reading it to old age homes and schools and
Okay.
everywhere because you get this silence.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think I couldn't. I wanted to make it a proper. People say, "Why isn't it a bigger book?" Well, because that's exactly how it happened, and that's exactly how I wrote it. So I just thought it was relevant to put up as a short story. It's called "The True Tales of Rotten Towers."
No, absolutely. I remembered what I'd said earlier on about what I'd forgotten earlier on about getting into the story. I'm sure, Esther, as a writer's bureau tutor, that you've come across, and I can always tell when I get books sent to me to edit, how many times well, not literally how many times the author's been through it, but whether they've been through it at all, by whether it's a first draft or a fairly well polished final draft. But one thing I find from especially debut authors is that they get to know the character, they give you lots of information about the character, and then in chapter 3 is where it starts. And I'm sure as a tutor, Esther, you've found that. You chop off the first few paragraphs of a short story and that's where it starts. Or the first couple of chapters in a book, and that's where it starts.
Yes, yeah, I also do editing as well, so I know what you mean. And some of the writers are great. There's one I've recently edited, and he plunged straight in. But then I talked to him over Zoom afterwards, and he said, "Yes, that wasn't the first chapter. It was, and again." And I said, "Yes, you've got it right with action. You'll plunge straight in. You don't need lots of backstory or scene setting. I have seen stories that have, so it's happening and you've got this wonderful picture, but you're left thinking, well, is there a story here? So yes, yeah, absolutely.
And the same really with endings. I don't know how you feel about your endings. We were talking earlier on about twists, but how annoying it is there's a new book out and you'll love the twist. Don't tell us it's got the twist. So if I say I'm judging, I've been asked to judge a couple of writing groups, short story competitions this year, and I was doing launching the competition the other day, and I say if you're going to have a twist in something, ideally the last word, or at least, or the last sentence, or if you need to, the last paragraph, but make it as final. And then when you go back, it's like writing crime. Anne Cleves has said this, Vera in Shetland has said this a few times, that because she's got her cast of Vera and colleagues already, but then she doesn't plot particularly. She gets an idea and then she's got the formula of the dead body at the beginning and the team and so on, and she doesn't find out until she gets to the end what happens. Obviously, the case is solved. But then she'll go back once she's found out at the end who was the villain, the criminal. She'll then go back and add in the red herrings and the clues. So you go there for thereafter. Do you ever find that you get to an end? I used to have a Jack Russell dog pointing behind because my this dog is often there, and I will get to an end, and I'm so pleased with it, I will literally clap.
That's really good.
But I think with Alan was saying earlier on about we were talking about series versus standalones, and I think that readers want more. If you're ever agents want more because publishers want more. So agents want more because publishers want more because readers want more. So having to choose between short stories and novels, I totally agree that you get to know the characters. And I write series so that's the first of a dog detective. That's a standalone. Those two are standalone novellas. Those two are the first two in a series of women's fiction. And I love the fact that I've got to know my characters. And every now and then I'll pull out. I like it when an author pulls out a character from one book and then either gives them more in another book or actually brings them in as the main character. And there was a collection of short stories by Kate Atkinson who writes. I can't remember the name. Main begins with a J, I think.
Jackson Brodie.
Jackson Brodie. Thank you. And her third book was called Not the End of the World. And I did a very short 3-week college course on Kate Atkinson. And it was the behind the scenes at the museum, which one at the time was the Whitbread, which I think then became the Orange. That one, the Whitbread, set in York. And I'd been to York Transport Museum. And then the second one was Human Croquet, and she's very quirky. I love her writing. So those were two standalones. And then the third one was a collection of short stories. So I read that first and then went back to the two novels and then did, so it was a week per book. And the third one, and I love the fact that in this collection of short stories, we learn about an accident, and then further on, we've gone back to this, the woman, plot spoiler, dies in this early story, but then we've gone back in time in a later story where she's become the main character. And I love that, where you pull out other characters.
Something that I think is also important with poetry and both with short stories is performing them. Because it's fine to read it and you have one voice when you hear the reading, your own voice, as opposed to the person who's written it. But when you actually perform it in front of an audience, it suddenly becomes very different. You hear your own voice differently, and an audience will listen to it differently. I do a monthly spoken word and poetry evening every month in Hale's Owen, and I find it great. It's almost like a band that wants to test out a song first with an audience, and you test out the piece, and you think, yeah, that's okay, or no, that word should change, and you actually will read it out differently because you obviously you read that a little bit quicker than you actually perform it, and you change the word before you've actually really done it, and you have to remember that because it sounds much better.
And yet you've read it out to yourself, or got your computer. I have a Kindle Fire, and that has text to speech, and my Mac has text to speech, and so you've heard it umpteen times by someone else, and you can almost read it out almost endlessly yourself and find something. But don't we
read
get
it differently.
go
read it
back
differently.
but don't you go back to stuff you've, in theory, I don't know if any of you have gone back to something you've already published and with hindsight and experience and think, actually I could change that. And I'm sure, Esther, with your editing, that you could get a client's book and go through it again and still find things, and go through it again and still find things. It's almost endless.
I think it is, and I think with your own writing, I know you're right. I think I've had things published before, or and when I'm looking at them again, or even putting them when I was putting them in the collection of short stories, I was tweaking them because I think I can make it better. But I think that's the writer's journey. You're not stopping ever, even if you've been doing it sort of 30, 40, 50 years. You're still learning and changing things. It's which is great, really.
It's like pruning your favorite rose bush.
Yes.
And it still grows. Or choosing your favorite child, Alan.
I think also you can also get in that perfectionist trap as well, in that you can go too far, and there is a point where you have to just leave it. You got to go, right, I got to be hands off now. I can, if I tweak it anymore, I might actually degrade it, and you got to just go hands off now and just got to leave it. Because it can be endless. You could keep going forever, and you could also almost like delay ever releasing something because you're never happy that it's perfect.
I think with a short story and with a poetry, if you change the tense from the present, I am, to I was, you get a complete different emotional response from the same things you've written just by changing here to heard, which I did just before I came on here. And it was fascinating because I've actually, although it was published years ago, I'm going to redo this whole thing, change its title, and put it into the past tense. To me, it sounds far stronger than it ever did when I first wrote it.
It's interesting because there's a tip, if somebody, not so much with a novel, but certainly with a short story, if people send me short stories to look at, then I'll say, if they might say, well, there's something that's not quite right. And I say, well, either change it from first person to third person or vice versa, or present tense to past tense. And it does make it, and quite often it'll be, that's all it needed.
Yeah, it hits
Which
you.
is fine if it's 1,000-word short story. If it's a 70,000-word novel, then they've got a job on their hands. But there we go.
I know somebody who did that as well.
We've got -1 minute. No questions in the chat. But Graham has said, sorry, no questions from me at this session, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though I can't write a short story to save my life.
What a lovely husband.
Yes, exactly.
No, we're very, because Graham writes the novels, and I write the short stories. I'm not sure I could do a novel. And he has started a short story. There was one even that was a long short story that was 10,000 words, and he rewrote it and it became 70,000 words.
Yeah,
So,
Mm.
yeah, I think he's
it's
not good
it's
at
the legs.
short.
It's the legs again.
Yeah, whereas I
I'm
don't
going.
think I could do what he does. So, and you, Alan, who've written, sort of longer work. So, and a novella, Lee. So, yeah, and you, Morgan.
We have gone two minutes over, but I'm going to ask the question I often ask. If when it gets to, if you go to a literary festival, book festival, and you're sitting in the audience and nobody asks a question, my default question, we'll start with Lee, and then we'll go down to Alan, and then we'll go to Esther, and then I'll say thank you very much and have another clap from Beth, because she just gave us a clap because I thought it was over, but then I thought of something else. Lee,
Yep.
is there a book that you've read that you wish you'd written?
No,
Okay, that was an easy answer.
no. I love certain authors and certain books, but I couldn't have written them, but I love them. So, and I don't try to emulate somebody else either.
No, no. Alan, I'll ask you that question slightly. Is there a plot you wish you'd thought of first, or a book you've read that you'd think, well, I can't write that? Um,
It's probably the same reason Lee said what he did. I write a lot of stuff, um, and it's kind of my own way of processing things that may have happened to me in my life.
mm,
Um, so it's really, really difficult to look at someone else's work and go, I wish I'd have written that, or I wish I'd had that idea, because it's kind of like, well, that's not my process. It's kind of it's got to come from me, really. I mean, one thing I was impressed with was I'm going to forget his name, Patrick Ness, Monster Calls. Now, what I seem to remember from that, that was a story that was started by a author friend of his that died, I think.
okay.
And then he took it on to, I might be having this completely wrong. I'm sure I'm right about this though. But
Mm,
then what he did, he took it on to finish it. And I think he completely rewrote it, but he
yeah,
took it on to finish it.
yeah,
Um, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant.
right,
And I have read stories, and I can't think of any examples where I think that's almost like that book, but someone else. It's almost like they were both in, I don't know, English class, and someone said, "Right, this is the premise of the book I want you to write, and this author wrote this, and this author wrote that."
right.
Um,
Hated it.
so I kind of like that, but
Yeah,
in terms of just looking at entire book or plot, I don't think I could because like I said, it's got to come from within, and I feel like I was trying to pretend to be someone else.
yeah, yeah. Esther.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do read a lot. I read quite widely, and children's, young adult, and crime, or sometimes I read romance. So I read quite a lot, but I just really admire the authors and think, oh, yeah, that's a really interesting idea.
Mm,
But I haven't sort of ever thought, oh, I wish I'd come up with it, because I think, like Alan said, it comes from within, and those sort of ideas, and sort of tapping into emotions, and I always enjoy putting myself in a character's shoes to write. So yeah, so not really, but I do admire the authors who've come up with these incredible ideas
mm.
and characters.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Yeah, I think, are we having you again, Alan? We are, aren't we, in the horror?
Oh no, not me. No, I'm
Oh,
done. I'm done.
done. Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably why you were in the ideas, because that was the overspill. So thank you so much. It's Lee, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. She's just done I love these emojis. Just done a little clapping. So,
Everyone's
yeah,
waiting.
I've got 4 minutes. Oh, yeah. Right. I shall download this one and then say goodbye to my husband because he's going out. Missing his favourite panel, the science fiction fantasy horror. So there we go. So thank you, everybody. It's
Thank you,
been a
Morgan.
pleasure.
I
Mate,
just want
thanks
to
you.
ask Alan something. Did you enjoy your interview on the radio last week?
I did. I did. I was amazed it came out like it did because I had a really rubbish night's sleep, which is why I couldn't remember
You were very good.
the band Fleetwood Mac. But I was amazed it came out like it did. Actually, it was a surprise because I couldn't remember anything of what I said.
Would that be
You
an
two
interview?
ladies want to be interviewed? Get in
I
touch
was
with me.
going to
I'll
say,
interview
would
for my radio
that
show.
be? I think I'm booked in for March. I was
Yeah.
going to say, Alan, was that Mr. Benson who interviewed you?
Yes, it was. It was, yeah, really, really good fun.
Good.
Really enjoyed
Well,
it. It's twice now I've been
he,
Bensoned.
Don't give her my tricks away. Don't say anything.
when I was first Bensoned, he told me invited me. So ever since then, I've been thinking, what are my 3 tracks? I have no clue.
You can have 4 then.
Well, I might. Okay. No, I'll stick with 3. It's like saying, okay, you can have another week to write a book. 3 it is. I should find 3. I should.
For me, it was easy because I always, whenever I write a book, it almost plays like a film in my mind. So I've almost got what would the soundtrack be for this film. So when Lee asked me what 3 tracks if I'm promoting a book, it's easy because I've already got a load of songs in my head that would be on the soundtrack if that was ever a film.
Beth has just she said, count me in for an interview, Lee. BBL.
Okay. Can you send me her details? Send me your details, Beth.
She's moderating the sci-fi fancy horror.
Okay, I'll speak to her later then.
Okay.
Under Lee Hemingway. Nice to see you all.
Okay, thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you, Morgan.
Bye-bye.